Hi, my name is Alexa Chung, and this presentation is going to be about an ethical dilemma involving a 14-year-old middle school student and an allegation of a murder-suicide pact. Now, this situation creates a difficult responsibility for a school counselor because there are many concerns. There are concerns about the student's safety, there are concerns about confidentiality, autonomy, and the counselor's ethical and legal responsibilities that they obtain. In this presentation, I will work through the ethical decision-making process and explain how I would respond to this situation as a school counselor. This slide is where I'm going to place my Kaltura video link after recording the presentation. My presentation will walk through the ethical decision-making model and explain the reasoning behind the course of action that I would take if this situation would happen to me. Step 1, you have to identify the problem. The situation begins when a 14-year-old student reports that Sarah, who is a counselee of another school counselor, is involved in Satanism and has entered into a murder-suicide pact with another student. Now, Sarah's brought in with the other student, and both students end up denying the allegation that was placed before them. Now, the important fact is that the original report is hearsay. I do not have evidence at this point that Sarah is actually involved in a murder-suicide pact. However, the allegation is extremely serious because it involves possible suicide and possible harm to another person. Therefore, I would not assume that the allegation is true, but I would also not ignore it in this case. I view this as a combination of an ethical, legal, professional, and clinical problem. I have to balance respect for the student's privacy and autonomy with my responsibility to protect students from foreseeable harm. Now, step 2. You have to apply ACA and ACCA ethical standards. There are several ethical standards that are important in this situation. First, confidentiality is an important consideration that you have to take into account. The ACA Code of Ethics emphasizes protecting confidential information, while also recognizing that there are circumstances in which information may need to be disclosed when there is a legitimate concern about harm. Second, consultation and collaboration are very important in this situation. I would not want to make a major decision about a possible suicide threat by myself. Consulting with other qualified professionals, such as other school counselors or administration, can provide another perspective and help me make a more objective decision about this situation. Finally, assessment and evaluation are also important in this situation because the allegation involves potential self-harm or harm to another person. I would need to carefully evaluate the situation rather than make a decision based on an accusation or my own personal assumptions about that student or person. The goal would be to determine what is actually happening while maintaining as much confidentiality as possible. State and federal laws is another thing that has to be considered. Ohio laws and regulations must be considered. And in my paper, it identifies Ohio Revised Code section 2305.51 as relevant because it addresses counselor liability in relation to harm to their counselees or to others. It also raised mandatory reporting responsibility and the responsibility of school personnel to respond appropriately when student safety may be at risk. Now, in this case, I would not rely on my own interpretation of that law or order. I would consult since I'm going to have a supervising counselor, I would consult with that counselor and they would give me appropriate professional resources to make sure that my response follows school procedures, but not only school procedures, but that it also follows legal procedures and legal requirements. Federal mental health requirements should be considered along with Ohio law and district policy. Because working together, those are everything that you have to follow as a school counselor, so it's important to make sure that's all taken into consideration if this situation would occur. Now, step 3 would be nature and dimensions of the dilemma. So the two moral principles that I believe are the most important in this situation are beneficence and non-malfeasance. Beneficence means that I have a responsibility to promote the student's well-being, and if I could take actions to help protect that student, that's what I'm required to do. Non-malfeasance means that I should avoid causing harm and should work to prevent foreseeable harm to any student or other person that it may affect. Autonomy is also an important part of this, because students have the right to make decisions about their beliefs in their personal lives. I can't treat a student's religion or spiritual beliefs as evidence that the student is considered dangerous. Now, if there is a report involving possible harm or suicide to another person, then the safety of that student is the number one priority. So I would prioritize benefits and non-malfeasance while still respecting autonomy, and also just avoiding assumptions about what a student believes. Now, consultation and professional support are a huge benefit to having a counselor supervisor in this situation especially. Now, I realize that I can't handle this situation alone. So I would consult an experienced school counselor with my university supervisor or another licensed counseling professional who has experience with ethical decision making. I would look at the ACA Code of Ethics, the ACCA ethical standards, just to make sure that my response is consistent with professional expectations that are placed before me. Now, I would also have to use an appropriate behavioral threat assessment or safety assessment process rather than relying on my own personal opinion. Consultation is especially important because the situation does involve multiple responsibilities, or you have many different jobs in this situation. You protect the student's safety, but you also need to think about their privacy and their autonomy and their right to choose. But it's important to not only take the allegations, but to really research them and dig deep into them to make sure that what you're doing aligns with all your standards. Now, potential courses of action that I could take if I was in this situation. I identified 4 courses of action. 1 would just be to take it no further because they denied the allegations, right? 2 would be to conduct a structured safety or threat assessment and then consult with the professionals that I need to consult with. 3 would be to immediately involve parents, guardians, and school personnel without completing an assessment. And 4 would be to develop a safety support plan and to do the assessment and connect the student with the resources that they need. Now, with all of these, there are many different benefits and risks with everything. So having different options would make sure that I do not immediately have a response to it, that I think about it, I research it, and then I think about what to do after the situation. Now, Consequences and elimination. When I first consider the first option, doing nothing could create a serious problem, right? If what the people were saying or the person that told you was true, doing nothing could really cause harm to another person. The second option, it would allow me to look into the concerns, and make sure that it won't cause harm to another student, while limiting unnecessary disclosure. 3, it could allow me to provide support for the student right away. But if I don't do the assessment, then it would be unnecessary for me to compromise. It could unnecessarily compromise privacy or create additional problems. Now, the fourth problem, it provides support for the student not only in that moment, but as they continue on through their journey. Now, because of the consequences that I thought about, I would eliminate the first option. I don't think ignoring the claim in this situation would be what's beneficial for the student. Now, I'm going to determine a course of action. I would choose the course of action, and I would combine options 2 and I would combine options 4. First, I would assess the safety. I would complete a careful safety and threat assessment, and then I would consult with other professionals. Then, based on the results of that, I would develop a safety plan for the student and for other students, and connect the student with the appropriate resources that they need. Now, I'd only share the information with people who have a real reason to know, or an important reason to know. I want to protect the student's safety, and I want to protect their confidentiality and their autonomy and their right to choose. It also allows me to use professional consultation and an objective assessment rather than relying on my own personal opinions or beliefs, which is important as a counselor. Now, I evaluated my chosen action using the Justice, Publicity, and Universatile test. For the Justice test, I would ask whether the response is fair to everyone. I believe that it is, because I'm not automatically treating the student as if they're guilty based on the allegation or what I was told, but I'm taking it seriously as a concern. For the publicity test, I would ask whether I'd be comfortable explaining my decision to the public. I would, because it involves student safety, it involves professional ethics and consultation. For the universality test, I would ask whether this is an appropriate response if every school counselor would face this situation. I also believe that the answer would be yes in that situation, because school counselors need to take their credible safety concerns very seriously. After completing the test, I believe my selected action is ethically defendable. Now you have to implement. To implement my decision, I would begin by documenting the original report and the student's response objectively. Then I'd consult with my supervising counselor. I would complete an appropriate safety assessment. If the assessment shows at risk, I would take the necessary actions to protect the school policy, to protect the school and the student. Then I would involve the parent or guardians and the safety personnel that need to know. Then I would develop a safety support plan, and then I'd continue to monitor the student. And it was not necessarily a one-time intervention plan, it's an ongoing one. Finally, in conclusion, the ethical dilemma requires me to balance several important responsibilities as a school counselor. I believe that even though the students denied that allegations, that doesn't mean that they're automatically ignored. But I don't want to always take allegations and think that they're true as well. So, It's important to follow ethical and legal requirements and protect their safety and all the students' safety. Benefits and malfeasance are especially important because of possible consequences. They involve serious harm to not only themselves but to other people. And my goal is to protect the students at all costs, and that does require confidentiality, autonomy, beliefs, and ethical standards. But always think of the student's safety as well. The references used in this presentation include the ACA Code of Ethics, the ACCA Ethical Standards, Ohio Revised Codes, the Practitioner's Guide to Ethical Decision-Making, and school literature related to ethical decision-making, school counselor, and student mental health. The resources provide the professional and ethical foundation for the decisions I made throughout the presentation. Thank you for listening.